For those of us who grew up playing baseball, we always dreamed of the big moment. Bottom of the ninth, runners on, and the coach calls you in to pinch hit. Now you may not have been the starting player, but this was your time to shine. Everyone imagines stepping up to the plate and hitting a home run, and the team carries you on their shoulders off into the sunset. But sometimes we get too distracted by that sunset. We allow it to blind us, causing us to strike out and blow the moment. The same can be said of individuals who have been called upon to lead in the interim, a period of time in which the area of formal leadership can be hazy. It is in this moment that we have seen interim leaders that have thrived and reached incredible heights. It is also in this same moment that we have seen interim leaders crash and burn. My name is Trip Hoblinzel, and today we'll be looking at 3 interim leaders who, for their own reasons, showed us that they were not made to have their number called. The first interim leader we will look at is D'Angelo Vickers. Now, for those of you who are familiar with the NBC hit television show The Office, you will recognize Mr. Vickers. D'Angelo was first introduced as the interim regional manager of the Scranton branch of Dunder Mifflin Paper Company following the departure of the beloved Michael Scott. Now, as you probably know, Michael is not your typical boss. He focuses on parties and relationships with employees, often more so than on the actual business of selling paper. However, his approach helped the office. Scranton was always one of the most successful branches at the company. D'Angelo was very similar to Michael when viewers first met him. He was goofy, a little silly, quite gullible. In fact, he seemed so similar to Michael that the transition between managers seemed like it would be smooth sailing. To be a regional manager, or a person of power for that matter, one must know how to command a room. That person needs to be organized, well-rehearsed, and charming. Now, D'Angelo was all of these things when he started at Dunder Mifflin. Having this kind of personality can make anyone a solid manager as long as they put in the hard work. Things were looking bright for Dunder Mifflin. That quickly changed when Michael left. Now, as soon as D'Angelo was running the branch alone, things went downhill. He wasn't great at sales, his advice was conflicting, and he started letting his personal struggles consume him at work. He quickly established himself as a seagull manager in the office. A seagull manager can be recognized as a manager who flies in, makes a lot of noise, dumps on everything, and then leaves. As soon as a problem would arise, D'Angelo would call meetings regarding the entire staff when it was obviously unnecessary. To make matters worse, the meetings were a complete waste of time as nothing of relevance or progress was presented to the group. This caused a complete disarray of company order and efficiency. The worst part was D'Angelo truly believed that in his heart of hearts that by expelling massive amounts of energy and putting on great shows, that he could prove to the office that he was not inept. Now, in one of his most famous scenes, he knew that the office was in a tough place morale-wise. His idea of a confidence booster would be to juggle 5 balls while blaring rock music and delivering a rousing, "Believe in yourself, nothing is impossible" speech all at the same time. This is a grand idea. The only problem was, D'Angelo didn't even have any balls to juggle, thus lending more to the idea that he did not know how to do this either. He still put on the performance by juggling imaginary balls with vigor, but this only led to his seagull manager image. Great leaders provide consistent feedback and coaching. The seagull manager does not. Instead, these bosses like to call attention to themselves, and once they feel like they have addressed the problem with minimal effort, they fly away, leaving the company behind to pick up the pieces. Now, one strategy that may have helped D'Angelo, if utilized correctly, would have been a better practice of the in group and the out group. In the episode of The Inner Circle, D'Angelo created these two entities. He made his favorite employees known by creating secret meetings in his office that were by text invitation only. This became known as the Inner Circle. Daryl, Kevin, Jim, and Gabe were the first members of this group, but as soon as someone disagreed or stepped out of line, they were kicked out. D'Angelo kicked them out by not inviting them to the next Inner Circle meeting. The Inner Circle made other employees feel unwelcome and ignored. Now, leaders naturally create these groups almost immediately and primarily subconsciously when they begin to take control of a group like D'Angelo did. Now, when done correctly, these groups are motivated by the status of their respective groups. The in-group will naturally perform to please the leader as they desire to reap the benefits of being on the inside. The out-group is motivated by the drive to gain admission to the in-group because they believe that the grass is greener on the other side. There were a few problems with D'Angelo's method of operation, however. First, the group consisted entirely of males. Now, at first glance, this didn't seem like a big deal. But D'Angelo made it very aware that he truly was a sexist and made it known that he saw all women as inferior. The women in the office immediately distrusted him as they had no desire to even attempt to gain admission to the in-group because they knew this was impossible. They lost all motivation. Now, secondly, he was wildly unpredictable to his in-group and conflicted on what he really wanted. He keeps people out of the inner circle because they disagreed with his ideas and orders. He was also quoted as saying,
"Seriously, they are trying to figure me out, and I don't like it. Once they figure me out, they start to tell me what I want to hear, and I need to quickly figure out who's a good worker and who is simply a good mind reader. Because as soon as I'm hearing what I want to hear, I'm not gonna care."
Because as soon as I'm hearing what I want to hear, I'm not going to care. Now, in this way, he neither wanted to hear conflicting views, and he also didn't want to hear people agree with him. Naturally, before the episode was over, the Inner Circle was disbanded, leaving D'Angelo as the only member of his own in-group, with the entirety of the office in the out-group, without motivation or trust for their leader. D'Angelo's rather complex story arc would only last 4 episodes before he let his showmanship get the best of him, when he attempted to hang on the rim of a basketball goal in the warehouse after dunking, bringing the goal down on himself, causing D'Angelo to suffer a traumatic brain injury, thus ending his tenure as interim regional manager of the Scranton branch. The next leader we will be looking at is the 15th President of the United States, James Buchanan. Consistently ranked by scholars as being one of the worst presidents in the history of the U.S., Buchanan is not as harshly criticized for what he did, but rather what he did not do. He is often attributed to being one of the grand enablers that fueled the American Civil War. Presiding over a rapidly dividing nation in 1860, Buchanan failed to grasp the political realities of the time. Relying on constitutional doctrines to close the widening rift over slavery, he failed to understand that the North would not accept constitutional arguments which favored the South. He expected the Supreme Court's decision on Dred Scott versus Sanford to handle the difficulties of deciding what to do about the issue of states' rights and slavery, rather than use his executive power and voice to solve the problem himself. He did a good job of pissing off both Republican abolitionists and Northern Democrats, earning him the nickname Doughface, a term used to describe a Northerner with Southern sympathies. Buchanan had promised in his inaugural address to serve just 1 term, and with the ongoing national turmoil over slavery and the nature of the Union, there was an obvious desire for new leadership within the Democratic Party. In 1860, Buchanan left the Democratic Party splintered and watched as he gave rise to a new leader, a Republican from Kentucky named Abraham Lincoln. The time in which a new president-elect is appointed while the old president-elect still holds office is known as the lame duck period. This interim period is a bit awkward at times, as the old president is still in power while the new president is preparing himself and his executive team to take on the country next. Many lame duck presidents use this time as an interim leader to get in any last-minute pardons or push any final reforms that they want to squeeze in before leaving office. James Buchanan, however, did quite the opposite. In Buchanan's time, the lame duck period lasted 4 months, quite a long time compared to today's standard. Instead of still acting as the president, Buchanan sat back and criticized the nation and the new president-elect. Prior to the election of 1860, winds of secession had blown in from state to state in the South, as many southern states plotted their ultimatum giving the possible results of the election. Buchanan refused to mitigate secession motives and rather just instigated the process instead. In response to Lincoln's victory, 7 southern states declared their secession from the Union. President James Buchanan, a lame duck with a cabinet full of Southerners, chose to blame Lincoln and Northern abolitionists for the division over slavery rather than take a hard line against Southern secession. In his December 1860 State of the Union address, Buchanan said, "The antecedents of the president-elect have been sufficient to justify the fears of the South that he will attempt to invade their constitutional rights," thus fueling the fire for the nation to subsequently divide once Lincoln took office. He stated that a revolution is justifiable in some instances, but argued that the South should wait for an overt or dangerous act before resorting to such a drastic action. Of course, drastic action was taken, leading to the bloodiest war to ever occur on American soil. Now, the big question that many ask is, did Buchanan have an obligation to stop secession as a lame duck? Well, of course, the answer should be yes, as he is the leader of the nation and should do whatever he can do in his power to protect the well-being of his land and his fellow statesmen. Buchanan stated time and again that the president had no power to coerce states to remain in the Union. As such, Buchanan took a backseat to the debates and let tensions rise to a breaking point, not realizing that in his case, inaction is still action. He let his cowardice and bias towards white, wealthy landowners guide his actions, and he allowed the followers to tell him how to lead, rather than being the leader who guides the followers. You see, leaders who exploit followers to achieve their selfish ends make followers less inclined to contribute. Buchanan selfishly played on the emotions of the American people in order to provide himself a scapegoat on the issue of states' rights. As such, the American people felt no obligation to listen to any guidance that he may have procured. Could Buchanan have stopped secession? It's up for debate. However, some historians have said, as a result of what he did, the Confederacy started out far richer and far better prepared for war. If we'd had a different person in office who actually used a little bit of force during the lame duck period, well, it's not that we wouldn't have had war, but it might have looked really different. Niccolo Machiavelli is most well known for his book, The Prince, in which he posed the idea that it is greater to be feared than to be loved if one cannot be both. But what if one never cared for love in the first place? What if power was their only goal? For those people, the ends always justify the means, no matter what it takes. For Vice President Dick Cheney on September 11, 2001, the means to the end were grim, but all while necessary in his dogged eyes. For some people, power can come out of the blue. For others, the power was always there. They were just waiting for the opportunity to seize it. Now, it's hard to imagine an American leader authorizing the shoot down of civilian aircraft. But in the first hour following the attacks of September 11, 2001, when it was unclear how many passenger jets had been weaponized by terrorists to cause harm to state officials and the population at large, that is just what happened. The leader in question was, in fact, Dick Cheney. What is more intriguing, however, is that the vice president isn't actually part of the military chain of command. And in theory, doesn't have an authority to order fighters into battle, let alone go a step above and order the shooting down of commercial domestic airliners filled with American civilians. Now, according to the standard protocols, such an order should only come from the President of the United States. However, at this time, President Bush was being hidden in the skies on Air Force One after being stripped from the educational event he was serving at in Florida. There goes the Commander-in-Chief. Next, the power would fall to the Secretary of Defense, Donald Rumsfeld. However, Rumsfeld was also not in position to give command because he rushed out of his Pentagon suite in the moments after the attack and went to the crash site at the Pentagon personally. Now, under the protocols for the secret system known as Continuity of Government, or COG, Rumsfeld should have been immediately evacuated to the bunker for safety. That left Cheney positioned in a bunker beneath the White House in the decision-making hot seat. Now, why would Cheney feel the need, better yet, even feel compelled to not only take command, but yet, better yet, give the order to shoot down American passenger jets that still remained in the skies? Dick Cheney once said, "If you're a man of principle, compromise is a bit of a dirty word." You see, Dick Cheney believed in a political ideology known as the unitary executive theory. Cheney believed that the president and the president's closest advisors should have the final word on all matters within the executive branch. As such, he saw this as his moment for his number to be called, and he was swinging the bat as hard as he could. After the second tower was struck, he got on the phone with Combat Air Controls and ordered them to shoot down any unresponsive aircraft that was deemed a threat. Now, when asked about the moment when he gave the order, Chief of Staff Scooter Libby recalled the Vice President decided in about the time it takes for a batter to decide to swing. We can see what he was doing when he stepped up at the plate. When asked for a double confirmation, Cheney told them that the order was unodire, meaning unless otherwise directed. This meant, for a brief period of time, fighter jets were scrambled into American airspace with the intent to terminate civilians. Cheney has always been heralded as a warmongering Machiavellian who utilized the vice presidency as a vehicle for ultimate power. All along his political career, Cheney did what was necessary all the time, no matter the emotional toll. Machiavelli would be proud. Some say that his political tenure in the political sphere is what caused him to lose most of his humanity. But it was also his prolonged tenure that put him in the right place at the right time on September 11th. You see, Cheney not only happened to be present in Washington, but he also knew the drills and protocols to prepare American leaders for an attack on the United States, having participated in the continuity of government exercises during the 1980s with Ronald Reagan. The absence of the formal leader, Bush, led to the group needing the next person with greatest knowledge, Rumsfeld, but the Secretary of Defense was gone, so out of necessity, Cheney steps up to the plate. The group recognized that they needed a leader in this interim period until they could contact President Bush, and Cheney felt like he was the man who had the nerve to make the tough decisions. The shoot-down order, however, would go on to be one of the first of a long string of instances in which Cheney stepped out of his zone of operation to circumvent the natural order of government to make his own decisions. These instances are ones that our great nation is still paying for today. You see, not everyone possesses what it takes to be a successful leader when their number is called. But it is through these few examples that we can examine and better understand if we ourselves have the capabilities of being a great leader, if there so happens to come a time when we are too asked to step up to the plate. Thank you for your time, and drive home safely.